All right. We are live. I only see a couple people in here, but that's okay. I chose to stream first. I announced my stream first, and Demon Mama decided she was going to stream today, so competing with my friend here. That's okay. Welcome. Come on in. I let the pre-stream go for a little bit just to make sure we had some people come in, but that's okay. Even if I told a friend, even if I have like 0 people watching, still doing this because I can turn my segments into YouTube videos and put them out there and people can see them that way. But I'm trying things a little differently because in the past I'd like watch a show when it came out at midnight, then I'd stay up writing a quick review of it, putting it together in a video, rendering it and dropping it at like 3 or 4 in the morning. And I kind of burned out on that. So instead what I'm going to do is like a weekly thing where I talk about the stuff that I've seen that week. So, and since it's been a while since I've uploaded a video, we're gonna talk all of the Star Treks since my last video. Like, I think my last review was the first episode of Picard Season 3. So we're gonna cover all of that. And then Strange New Worlds just premiered its 2nd season today. And Paramount put out the 1st season for free on YouTube. So I have spent the last couple weeks encouraging everyone I know to go and watch that one. But we're going to go ahead and talk that because I went and rewatched the 1st season in preparation for the 2nd one. So we got some Star Treks to talk about. So let me pull up my notes. And first things first, let me set here the topic. We're going to start with Picard Season 3. And let me swap over here. Okay, perfect. So, Picard Season 3 is like, that was the big, massive hype one. Like, when Picard was first announced, Patrick Stewart only agreed to do it because he did not want it to just be a Next Generation reunion. He didn't want everyone else to come back. He wanted it to be like a separate story. He wanted to be outside of Starfleet, all of that. And I don't think that worked out very well. And I don't think the showrunners thought it worked out very well either, because by season 3, basically every original character from Picard has been written out other than Raffi. Let me pull up. Got it here. Yeah, Raffi, here we are. You're gonna load. Come on. Memory Alpha is not a great site. Come on. Images don't like to load. Okay, anyway. This is who I'm talking about. She's the only original character from the show that made it through to season 3. Which kind of sucks for everyone else, because I don't think it had bad actors. I just think it had bad writing for them. And that kind of sucks for them, right? You get cast in a new Star Trek thing, and then you find out that people don't know what to do with you, and they're writing you out halfway through season 2 to get ready for the actual show that everyone wants to watch in season 3. So, that out of the way, let's talk season 3. Season 3 is amazing. Season 3 is clearly written by somebody who gets the characters, who gets Star Trek. It is a little bit like heavy on the nostalgia bait. But like in a different way, because like season 1 of Picard had a lot of characters introduced that were like previously established characters in canon. They had like Bruce Maddox, who was the guy who wanted to declare Data not a person. There was Icheb, who was the Borg kid on Voyager. There was Hugh, who was a former Borg. Those all show up in season 1 of Picard basically just to be unceremoniously killed off. There was no real respect for their character given. And in season 3, you get a little bit of that. Like Commander Shelby from The Best of Both Worlds, she shows up. And she dies pretty much immediately after we see her. But like she was just kind of brought in as like a little tease, like, oh yeah, that's Shelby. I remember what she was up to. But one of the characters that they bring back that they still kill off, but I feel like they did a good service to her character is Ro Laren. She was the first Bajoran character in Star Trek before Deep Space Nine came out. They actually kind of wanted her to be on Deep Space Nine, but Michelle Forbes didn't want to commit to a series at that point. She shows up in this, and when I first see her, I'm worried, okay, here we go. Here's another one where they're just not going to respect her. Because, like, the last time we saw her, she had defected from Starfleet, and here she is back in a Starfleet uniform, right? But she's, they explain it. They actually respect, and, like, she talks about, you know, the long process that she went through to, regain, herself, like, in the eyes of Starfleet. And Picard, like, hates her. Because, you know, the last time he saw her, he sent her out on a mission and she just betrayed him. But it's they have to contend with that, and they like reach synthesis, and I feel like bringing her in was they did something good with it. And also I think when they kill her off in this season, they did it in a way where like there's still a possibility that because she goes off on a shuttlecraft and then the shuttlecraft explodes. But this is a franchise with teleporters, so they even said that they had like written a thing where she was going to get teleported off the shuttle before it explodes, but they either didn't have time to film it or didn't have the budget to film it. So as far as Star Trek is concerned, she's dead for now, but she could totally come back at any point. So let's actually go back to Rafi here, though. Oops. That. I have kind of a problem with the way that the show has treated Rafi. She's the only one that they kept all 3 seasons, so I like that, but she really doesn't have anything to do. And she's, at the end of season 1, they like tease a romance between her and Seven of Nine, but then by the start of season 2, they've broken up. And then they spend that season kind of, you know, slowly building that back up, like their team's together for most of it. And by the end, they're back together. And then at the start of this season, they're broken up again. And so it's like, you get to have gay characters in Star Trek off screen. And like, if you are actually looking for any kind of real development in the relationship, I think the only other place that you can go to get that, I don't know about the books. I don't read the books or anything like that, and those, as far as I'm concerned, aren't canon anyway. I don't think the books have ever been considered canon. But there is an audio drama called No Man's Land, with the actors for Seven of Nine and Rafi. And I haven't listened to the whole thing. I listened to like the start of it, because audio dramas aren't my thing, but I do need to go back and listen to it, because like if you get the actual actors to do it, I think that's probably canon at that point. But it's kind of disappointing that it all happens off screen. And when Rafi shows up in this season, it's like she has stuff to do for the first couple episodes, like she's investigating you know, the growing changeling plot. But then as soon as her handler Worf shows up, it's like they forget that she's in the show. She'll like just kind of appear in like a hallway to fight some dudes whenever they need her to do an action scene. But then like it's like you see her and you go, oh, I actually forgot she was in this show. That's right, she's still around. And I don't think that was fair to her. But I don't know. There's still potential for a Seven Rafi relationship in the future, and we'll talk about that once I kind of wrap up my thoughts on this season. One thing I really like about the show is that, you know, it was a big thing that was billed as, we're bringing back the original cast, all of them. They're all coming back, except for Will Wheaton, who did show up at the end of season 2 of Picard. But that's it. He doesn't get to reunite with the rest of them, and Denise Crosby doesn't get to come back either because, well, Tasha's dead, but there's still, it's Star Trek. You could have brought her back. There was one moment where we see the hologram of her that Data has. But that's all the acknowledgement we get. They don't even say her name, you know? And I don't know. I would have liked to see them work in everyone. I don't know. Even like Pulaski, Diana Muldaur. I'm pretty sure she's still alive. I don't know. Maybe they could have just had her in for like, you know, one shot at the end or something. But those people aside, they bring back everyone. And instead of bringing back everyone like all at the start, you know, they start out, Picard and Riker are like, they're the main characters for this one. They're in every episode. And you know, they're tagging along. They're old bros, they're old buddies, and that's great. But for the other characters, they don't just show up right away. They show up when it's logical for them to show up. So that it doesn't feel a little overstuffed. It feels like it, you know, it's got a nice build to it. And the way that like Deanna shows up, she doesn't show up until like episode 7 or 8, except that there was like a couple bits where like Riker's talking to her on like a communicator earlier in the season, and my first thought was that like they couldn't actually get Marina Sirtis like on set, like there was a scheduling issue, and so all she could do was these voice calls. And I'm glad that that's not the case. They were just saving her for a moment when they could bring her in and have her actually do her counselor thing and have it, you know, work for the show. So and then like Geordi, he shows up once they need like you know, once they're on the run from Starfleet and they need some help. And Geordi's got his daughters, and he's got 2 daughters. One is the pilot on the Titan, and then the other one works with him at like this Starfleet museum of old ships. And the ships are all just the ships that have been in every Star Trek show. And that other daughter, that's played by LeVar Burton's actual daughter, Mika Burton. And I don't think she's as strong an actor, and I feel like that's kind of why she's not the one who's the pilot. They just kind of keep her around. She's like also there, but I couldn't even tell you what her name was. She didn't really have any memorable lines. She didn't even really connect with her sister that much. It was more just a cameo of, hey, we've got LeVar Burton's daughter. She wants to be in it. It's cute. Have a father-daughter bonding time. And there's a little bit of that, but I would have liked to see them work a bit more with that. But I get the feeling they didn't, probably because she's not the strongest actor. That's my read on it. And, you know, when that happens, it's you don't want the project to suffer too much just for nepotism's sake. So that's not a minor gripe. Let's see. As far as Data goes, Data has died twice in Star Trek now, because he died in Nemesis, and then they brought him back in season 1 of Picard as like a scientist had like kind of reconstructed his consciousness from B4's memory, B4, his brother that he had downloaded his consciousness onto before he died. And so, but then Data's kind of just living in a little, you know, computer at the time. He doesn't have a body, and he asks Picard to let him die. And so, but like when that happened, I was just like, but we've already been through this. We've already had Data die and mourn him. And so to bring him back just to have him die and mourn him again felt like overkill. Like, okay, we're hitting all the notes we've already had here. And so going into it, I didn't want it to be Data. I wanted not LeVar Burton. I wanted Brent Spiner to play either Lore or B4 or Alden Sunger. He's played a different character in every season of Picard anyway, so there's precedent for it. But what they do is apparently Data has been rebuilt, and he's not the same Data because he's in a newer android body like Picard has, so he's flesh and blood still, or he's flesh and blood now, and he has access to emotions, and so he basically gets to be the real boy that Riker teased him about in Encounter at Farpoint. And that is a nice touchstone to his character. Like, the last time we see him in the show, he is talking to Deanna in a counseling session, you know, talking about his feelings and everything. And it's cute. He gets there. And another good thing that we get because they bring Data back for this is that Geordi gets his moment of grief. This was one of the biggest problems with Star Trek Nemesis, is that Geordi didn't get to grieve. Data dies, and because the director didn't care about Star Trek, he didn't even think to, like, shoot something where even Geordi even looks sad, like in a one shot. Like, it's just him standing on the bridge with everyone else looking sad. He didn't really even get any lines to eulogize his best friend, and that was really unfortunate. And LeVar Burton gives such a good and heartbreaking speech in the show when he gets to see Data and talks about how losing Data broke him. I think that scene alone, giving LeVar that, giving Geordi that, I think that justifies bringing Data back, even though he had died twice, and I was like, don't bring him back again. After that, I was like, I can accept it. So, let's see. Let's talk about the villain, who, oh my god, why am I blanking on her name? I have to look her up here. She is a changeling. She's played by Amanda Plummer, who is the daughter of Christopher Plummer. And she played Vatic. That's right. That was her name. She's fun. She's not an overly complicated character. She's just a changeling who, you know, some of the funnest villains can just be, you know, your big hammy characters who just sit in a smoky room and deliver menacing dialogue and have, you know, fun little villainous quirks and have a scarred face. That's all great. I mean, that's basically what her father played in Star Trek VI. Christopher Plummer played the Klingon villain in Star Trek VI, and really his only character attribute is that he's really into Shakespeare. Like, during the big end battle with him versus the Enterprise, he's just, like, open comms, quoting Shakespeare as he's, like, firing on the Enterprise, to the point where, like, McCoy even complains about it. And a lot of... I don't know anybody who doesn't like Christopher Plummer's character in Star Trek VI. Even though he's kind of a nothing character, there's nothing really to him. And I kind of feel like Vadic's the same way. There's a little bit... We get, like, some of her backstory where we find out she was actually held captive by Section 31 scientists who were doing experiments on her, and it's possible that they used her to build the bio weapon that they used against the changelings in the Dominion War. So, you know, she's got her tragic backstory and the, you know, the hinting that, oh yeah, the Federation can be bad sometimes too, which, you know, Deep Space Nine, I think, probably did a better job there. That just gives her a little bit more justification of, yeah, I can understand why she would want revenge on the Federation. They did try to genocide her species. That is bad. That was bad of them. But as far as a complex villain, she is not. No. She's fun. She's hammy. She's great. I like her. One of the big standouts, though, of the show has to be Jack Crusher. Now, there are, in fact, 2 people named Jack Crusher. But Memory Alpha, good enough, I searched Jack Crusher and it just gives me the one I'm looking for here. So the original Jack Crusher was Picard's best friend in the Academy, and then he got married to Beverly Crusher, had Wesley, and died in Picard's command. But now, here we are, 20 years after Nemesis. Beverly Crusher's been off. She hasn't talked to anybody in a long time, and it's because it turns out she and Picard have a kid, and she wanted to protect that kid from all of the universe-saving hijinks that Picard gets into. And so here we have Jack Crusher, a young man who's kind of conflicted, in terms of, you know, his feelings for Picard. We find out actually that a couple years before this, he had actually sought out Picard, like at a bar where Picard's just telling glory stories to young cadets who you know, see a legend and, you know, ask him. And he asks him, like, did you ever want a son or anything like that? Do you ever want a family? And Picard's like, oh, young man, Starfleet's the only family I'll ever need. Which, obviously, he didn't know he's talking to his son at the time. I'm sure his tune would have changed there, but, like, obviously, you know, you seek out your father who's never known you and you've never known them, and that's the first thing you hear. It's gonna be disappointing. But I really like Jack, and he and Picard grow more fond of each other over the course of the series. I like the actor. He's inexplicably British just because Picard has a British accent, so his son has to have a British accent, even though Picard's French. And Jack was raised by Beverly, who does not have a British accent. She has a mid-Atlantic accent. But they just, like, have a line that's like, oh, yeah, no, he went off to boarding school in London. Which I think is actually the same excuse that they gave for why Deanna Troi has her accent in Star Trek. This is an aside, but it's a funny one. When Deanna Troi was first created as a character, Marina Sirtis was doing her accent that she thought was like the alien Betazoid accent. But then when her mom shows up, she's played by Majel Barrett, who just has a very brash American accent. And she's like, well, I don't understand. I thought I had an alien accent, but here's my mom who's the alien, and she has an American accent. So where'd my accent come from? And then, like, Rick Berman's like, oh, it's your dad's accent. But then there was an episode much later in TNG where she has flashbacks to being a kid, and we see her dad, and her dad also just has an American accent. So then she goes up to Rick Berman, she's like, what the hell? Where's my accent from, Rick? And he's like, they sent you off to boarding school. So they used the same excuse they gave for Marina Sirtis's Deanna Troi accent, gave it to Jack Crusher here. He's good. I'm looking forward. Like I said, I think that they're going to be doing a spin-off of Star Trek Picard called Star Trek Legacy, where they take a lot of these characters that they've introduced in the show, like 7 of 9 is now captain of the Enterprise G, which they renamed the Titan at the end, and Rafi's her first officer, and he's now joined the Crusher's now joined Starfleet, and he's like you know, a special advisor, and Geordi's daughter is piloting the ship. And Terry Matalas, who's the showrunner for season 3, he has called it Star Trek Legacy. It's a pitch that he's got now. It's not greenlit, and I don't think it's going to be greenlit yet because we're still in the writer's strike. But basically, everyone at Secret Hideout wants this show to happen. And yeah, hey Admiral Paco, yeah, one explanation for mismatched accents, and we are sticking with it. Absolutely. But yeah, going back to a Star Trek Legacy, basically everyone at Secret Hideout wants this spin-off to happen. And reception for Star Trek Picard Season 3 was basically universally positive. And so I think it's a foregone conclusion that we're getting a spin-off. And with 7 as captain and all of these characters introduced here showing up, it's just a matter of writer strike has to be over. They have to, you know, find the budget for it, because I know Paramount took a big loss on the streaming site, and so they're kind of like having to pare down how many things they've got in production at one time. They've already got, I mean, Discovery's ending after season 5, which I think they've finished filming that, but I don't know when it's coming out. But they've also got 2 animated series that they're making, Lower Decks and Prodigy. And then there's a spin-off of Discovery called Starfleet Academy that's coming out. And then they've got the Section 31 movie with Michelle Yeoh. So they've got a lot on their plate already. So we may not see Star Trek Legacy for a couple years, but like I would bet any amount of money it will happen. It will be made. And that brings me to the real breakout character of Picard Season 3. Okay. Let's see. Memory Alpha commute. Nope, that's not who I'm looking. Here we are. Captain Shaw. This guy, Captain of the Titan. He is absolutely the best character of this season. And they kill him off in the last episode. He's this abrasive asshole. When he first shows up, he's like refusing to call 7 of 9. He insists she use her birth name of Annika Hansen, even though she hasn't gone by that since she was 6. He's, rude to Picard and Riker when they show up on his ship. Insults Riker's music taste, insults Picard's wine. Actually, that's a running gag in this season, is that everyone is making fun of Picard's wine. They're like, oh, I don't really like it that much, or it's not really my thing. I'm more of a Merlot guy myself. And it's kind of funny because before that, the Chateau Picard has always just been seen as, oh, well, Picard has a vineyard and comes from a very established family, so it must be good. But the idea that Picard would retire from Starfleet and just go off to make wine that isn't very good is really funny. But Shaw is one of those characters. He starts off, he's an asshole, you hate him. Like, after the first episode, I was just like, I want this guy off the show as soon as possible. He's racist to 7. He's just a total jerk. But then you find out, well, like, Riker and Picard were, like, going onto his ship to, like, secretly commandeer it to go rescue Beverly, like, without Starfleet knowing. So, like, they went onto his ship with false pretenses to rope him into some big galaxy-spanning adventure with danger, and everyone's gonna, be shot at, and everyone's gonna be called a traitor. And, like, he's just a guy. Like, he has a line. He's like, I'm just a dipshit from Chicago. And, he just wants to do his job. He doesn't want to be the big hero. He's just like, look, I've got a ship in the fleet. I'm just doing my job. Can we just, like, not rock the boat and try to do any kind of big heroics? Can I just be the guy? And we also find out that, like, his hatred of Borg makes a lot of sense because he's a survivor of Wolf 359. So that would be a really good reason for him not only to hate Borg in general, but to hate Picard in particular, because Picard killed his entire ship. Now, obviously, Picard wasn't in control of himself. He was, assimilated. But still. And Shaw has, like, survivor's guilt from that. He's like, it was him and a bunch of others standing around. There's, like, one escape pod left and only 10 of them. And they can't all fit in it. And they're standing around like, well, who goes? And, like, an officer just comes up and points at him and goes, you go. And he's like, why pick me? I'm just a dipshit from Chicago. Like, she didn't even go. She sent me to live while she died. And that's, that's what the Borg are to him. Yeah, some lingering resentment of Picard is understandable. Absolutely, Paco. But, like, he grows on you so much. He's this smartass. He's always has some snide comments to say. It's always great. But then they kill him off at the end after everyone had loved him. And, like, Todd Stashwick has been on Twitter. Every episode that came out was always, talking with fans. He just seems like he's a great guy. Todd Stashwick's the actor for him. And I have to believe with the fan reaction to him that they'll bring him back in some capacity. It's sci-fi. You can bring people back from the dead. They've done it before. He could just be like a hologram on the ship. Obviously, he can't be captain of the Enterprise G, which is the Titan, just renamed because, that was kind of the big reveals. They wanted to tell the story of the next Enterprise, but not tell you it's the Enterprise until the end. And so he can't be captain of the Enterprise, but have him be a hologram, Have him still stick around. He's great. There's ways to do it. Everyone wants it. All right, let's see. What else do I have to talk about with the show? Oh yeah, we get the Enterprise D. Even though that blew up in Star Trek Generations, the star drive section blew up, but the saucer had survived because it crashed on the planet. So the big reveal at the end of the season is when there's this big Borg plot that's taken over the entire fleet because they're all like, they have this new Bluetooth Wi-Fi system to interoperate, which the Borg are able to hijack and control the entire fleet as one unit. They have to go and find an older ship that's not been retrofitted with this that they can use. And, well, Geordi has been restoring the Enterprise for the last 20 years because they recovered the saucer, and he just took the star drive section from another Galaxy-class ship, put it all together. And this is kind of one thing that I noticed, is that there were pretty limited sets on the show for most of it. Like, most of the sets are just kind of like, you know, the Titan Bridge and a meeting room and a hallway. And I think a big part of it was just they were saving their budget, their set budget, to build a perfect replica of the Enterprise D bridge. And it's gorgeous. It looks so good. And people who are friends with me will have probably heard me talk about at some point, like, my big dream, if I ever win the lottery, is I want to build a home theater that is a 1-to-1 replica of the Enterprise D bridge. And so if I win the lottery, I know exactly who I'm calling to get that done, because I forget her name, but I'm following her on Twitter. She was the person that they tasked with rebuilding the set and getting everything involved and doing all the research and making sure, you know, finding the right carpet and getting all of the chairs just right. Like, they did such a good job with it. Oh, I love it. And then, one more thing that I've got that's kind of an issue with it is one of the big reveal is that Jack Crusher has actually, like, Borg DNA. Like, they had implanted something in Picard that he passed on to his son that creates like a Borg transceiver. So, like, Jack is able to actually, like, broadcast commands to the collective. And so the Borg actually use him to enact a big change where, like, the Borg and the Changelings have been working together. The Changelings have infiltrated Starfleet, and they've modified the transporter buffer patterns to add on new DNA to basically everyone in the fleet that make them receivers of those Borg transmissions. So it's basically all wetware. It's all an organic Borg assimilation, and they can use Jack to control the entire fleet. But because you can't just, like, change someone's DNA and it automatically builds new structures. That's not how it works. That would be like you have built a house and then you change the blueprints. That doesn't automatically change the house. It only affects people who are, like, 25 and younger because they're still developing, they're still growing. And kind of the unfortunate implication of that is that some people pointed out is that it sounds like it's a social contagion that only affects the young, right, as we're dealing with a lot of anti-trans rhetoric. And I don't think that the authors intended that. I think it was just an unfortunate parallel that some people drew with it. And yeah. So, oh, hey, Philippa. Yeah, that is the song that you used. What else am I talking about? I think I've probably just about covered everything I have to say about Picard Season 3. I think it's great. Really look forward to Star Trek Legacy. It's probably going to be several years before we see it, but it's going to happen. Yeah, so with that, let's move on. Let me change this, and let's do Strange New World, Season 1. Pop that on over here. Okay. I love this show. I think Strange New World is probably one of the best Star Trek shows that's ever made. Before this show came out, when people wanted to get into Star Trek, I would always recommend that they start with one of the older shows. I would recommend they start with The Next Generation or Deep Space Nine. Or, like, when Lower Decks first started, I was like, if you want to get a good vibe of what, like, classic Star Trek is in a new show, go watch Lower Decks. Obviously, it's more comedic and it's animated and stuff, but, like, in terms of like the episodic storytelling. You sit down for an hour, you get a complete story from beginning to end. Obviously there's characters that like have already been established and stuff, but it's not like Discovery and Picard have both been shows where you can't just pick a random episode to watch. You kind of need to watch a season from beginning to end, otherwise you're not getting a complete story. And that's what, you know, we get a lot of that. Like most TV these days is that it's kind of just, you know, 8 to 12 episode movies rather than TV shows, and that's good for some things. You know, I like a lot of shows that do that, and I also like that we aren't having to have like we're not in the old era of filler where it's like, oh well, we gotta have 26 episodes a season because, you know, we've got our schedule to meet, and so they crank out a bunch of filler episodes. Now that everything is settled down to about 8 to 12, 13 episodes per season, you have just meat, and that's great. And so I think with Strange New Worlds, they recognized, okay, well, we've got Star Trek and we're doing it the new TV way where we're telling long form stories, but so many people are missing the like you could just hit a play random on TNG and get something that tells a complete story from start to finish. The original series was like that. Voyager was mostly like that. Deep Space Nine even was still kind of like that, although they had a lot more long form stuff toward the end of the show. But for Discovery, like, I actually don't even know if I've watched a season of Discovery more than once, because I like to sometimes just pull up a random episode and watch it, and I can't do that with Discovery. But with Strange New Worlds, you totally can. Like, I've watched episodes of Strange New Worlds completely out of order. I've watched them a couple times, just pull them up. It's great. It's classic Trek, but you still have, you know, your characters that have their arcs growing through it. And so, Strange New Worlds is... technically, it's both a sequel and a prequel. It's a spin-off of Star Trek Discovery, because Captain Pike shows up in Season 2 of Discovery, along with Spock and Number One, who are all characters from the original series pilot, the original pilot, before the studio said, oh, this is too cerebral, let's do a new one, recast everyone, and bring in Kirk. These are, like, the original Enterprise crew. And... but aside from that, and like there's like a couple lines in the first episode, you really don't need to know anything about Star Trek going into this. You can just go in fresh, and so I recommend Strange New Worlds as the starting point for people who want to get into Star Trek. Here, let me pull up my notes more. What else do I have? Okay, so one big thing about doing a prequel series is, like, it's kind of a problem that prequels always have, is that if you know a character's ultimate fate, stakes for them can be lowered. Because they're like, well, they're not going to die, obviously, because we know when they die. But they kind of anticipated that. And so Captain Pike, even though Captain Pike's ultimate fate is to get horrible radiation burns and be confined to a wheelchair where he can only communicate with 1 beep for yes and 2 beeps for no, they decide to have him get a vision of the future. He sees his ultimate fate. He knows what's coming for him. And so he has to deal with that. He has to grapple with, what do you do? How do you live when you know your ultimate fate, and you know your ultimate fate is horrible? And so they play a lot with that. Like, there's even there's a great moment where Uhura is on the show. She's a cadet. She's not a lieutenant yet. And Pike's just asking her. He's like, yeah, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? And like when he says 10 years, he like there's like a pause in his voice, and he kind of cracks it. 10 years. Where do you see yourself? And that's because in 10 years from now, he's going to die. And he's seen it. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Well, it's getting a lethal dose of radiation trying to save some cadets in a reactor meltdown. Yeah, I think yeah, Drake the Snake, absolutely. It is a great angle. they do a lot with it in the first season. Pretty much every episode, there's like some little thing where he's pensive about it, and they actually play that out in the season 1 finale. Is that he meets one of the cadets that he saw in his vision of the future, that he is fatally injured trying to save. But this is one of the cadets that doesn't make it. And at this point, he's just a kid. And meeting this kid that he knows is fated to die, it breaks him. He goes into his quarters and he starts writing a letter to like warn these kids about it, to try and change it. He's like, what's gonna happen on this star date? Just don't go into the reactor room. And as he's writing it, himself from the future shows up and says, hey, you're about to fuck everything up. Don't do this. But because you're not just gonna believe me because I show up and look like you, here we go. I brought a little time crystal. Touch that, and it's gonna give you a vision of the future and show you why you can't write that letter. And the vision of the future that he gets is a recreation of an original series episode called Balance of Terror, which was the first episode that had the Romulans in it. Hey Rain, thanks for popping by. I hope you're cozy. So, Balance of Terror, classic Star Trek episode. It's the one that introduces the Romulans, it introduces the cloaking device. It's a game of cat and mouse. It's a game between a battleship and a submarine, but in space. It's probably a lot of people's favorite episode of the original series. And they examine what happens if that scenario takes place, but Kirk isn't captain. And they even, like, they bring Kirk in. Like, Kirk shows up in that episode. He's captain of another ship, but Pike's captain of the Enterprise, which is the flagship of the Federation. The bigger ships, the more powerful ships, so he takes point, and he's more cautious. He is more cautious than Kirk. Right at this point, there hasn't been active war between the Romulans and the Federation for 100 years. They've been keeping to their sides of the neutral zone, but the Romulans have a cloaking device now, and they're using it to attack our outposts along the neutral zone. And Kirk's like, we need to destroy the ship now. And Pike's like, if we do that, we might start a war. And he's like, well, I would say attacking the outpost is starting the war. And so, because Pike is too cautious, because Pike is more concerned with trying to, you know, talk things out with the other guy, he ends up showing weakness, enough weakness that the Romulans are like, okay, it's time to attack. And it leads to a massive war, but more immediately, in the aftermath of their battle, the initial battle that starts the war, Spock dies. And that's the clincher for Pike. Future Pike tells him, look, I've run through this scenario 100 different ways. Every future where you avoid your ultimate fate, Spock dies. And he dies in a way that's just as horrible as Pike does. And you can't let that happen. He's got important things to do. And that's what ultimately leads Pike to accept his fate, not try and change his future. He's going to sacrifice himself to save Spock. And that's a great way to handle it, I think. I suspect we're probably not going to get too much more. I think that was more of like a season 1 thing. Because, like, at the beginning of the season, Pike doesn't even want to go back to command because of the vision. Like, he's off living in a cabin in Montana. He's grown a misery beard. He's just riding horses and watching old movies and cooking. And, like, the Admiral's like, come on, you gotta go get back on the saddle and go to space. And he's like, no, you don't want me there. He's like, no, you don't want you there. I do want you there. But I appreciate, it's a really good season arc for Pike. And let's talk more about Pike. Pike, I think, is my favorite captain in all of Star Trek, which is crazy because, like, you know, for decades, the conversation has been, do you like Kirk more or Picard more? And, you know, and then you had people who are like, well, I like Cisco. And then you had people who are like, well, Janeway, she's a war criminal, but you know what? She's a girl boss, so she's mine. For Pike to show up and immediately become my favorite captain, like, even when he shows up in Discovery Season 2, he's already my favorite captain. That's insane. But he's just this very warm, fatherly figure, but not in the way that, like, Picard's a father. Picard is, you know, more of a stern authoritarian figure. You know, he's got wisdom, but he's gonna be lectury about it. Pike's just like a dad. He loves his crew. He cooks meals for them. He wears an apron. He's just such a good, warm, and like his leadership style is leadership without ego. When he shows up, and I think this is just a consequence of the way that Discovery is written, because the main character of Discovery is not the captain. It's Michael Burnham is the main character. It's the first time in Star Trek where the main character hasn't been the captain. So because of that, when he shows up as a captain, well, in terms of writing, he still has to be subservient to the main character, right? So the way they write him is, look, I am here to enable everyone to do the job that they need to do. I am here to listen to you, hear what you need, and give you the direction and the tools to accomplish that. And he reminds me of the best boss I've ever had. I know, Rain, if you're still listening, we had a conversation about this. You brought up, you know, when you're, you brought up your captain when you were in the Navy, and it's kind of like that. He's such a good guy. I love him. And Anson Mount is just such a warm, charming, handsome dude. Great hair. I just love him. Let's see. What's my next note? Okay, so then we've got Uhura, who, you know, character from the original series. She actually gets more character development in one episode of Strange New Worlds than she got in 3 seasons and 6 movies of the original series. Obviously, Uhura in the J.J. Abrams movies gets more development, but the J.J. Abrams stuff, that's a separate universe, so different versions of the characters. But the Prime Star Trek universe, Uhura, this is like, we find out a whole bunch about her backstory in just like one episode, where she actually she wanted to be a teacher in linguistics at you know, a university that her parents went to, but when she was about to attend, her entire family is killed in a shuttlecraft accident, and so she couldn't go to that university because every time she went there, it would like remind her of them, and she's like, I can't do it. She wants to live with her grandma, and her grandma was in Starfleet, so she decides, okay, well, let me try Starfleet. And I think specifically the line, my grandma was in Starfleet, I think they wrote that because at the time, Nichelle Nichols was still alive when they were filming the first season. And I suspect they wrote that in because they wanted her to come on and play Uhura's grandma. But she passed, so obviously that can't happen now. But I think that's what they were going for. And I appreciate that they're giving her more to do. And that's kind of like all of the other characters who were in the original series that are on this show. Like, we've got Nurse Chapel. She's basically a completely different character now. In the original series, Nurse Chapel was really just there as kind of a background character, unless you had her doting on Spock, because she kind of had this unrequited love for Spock. Spock couldn't return it because, you know, he's Vulcan, so he can't love. They're changing her up more. She's a lot more assertive. And they're still playing with the Spock Chapel romance thing, like they're building towards like, oh, is there something there? But Spock at this point is engaged to T'Pring, who is a character who showed up in the original series, the episode Amok Time, when Spock went through Ponfar and had to return to Vulcan to either mate or die. And but when he shows up, T'Pring's like, I will not be mated to you. I have found this other guy instead that I'm leaving you for. And Spock ends up releasing the Plaque-Tau, the blood fever, by engaging in ritual combat with Kirk. And once he thinks he's killed Kirk, then it's over. But Kirk wasn't actually dead because McCoy injected him with a thing that would simulate death instead. That episode, all the way back there, T'Pring's there. She just shows up to be like, no, I don't want to marry you, Spock. But at this point, she has, like, at the first episode, she's proposed to Spock. And so through the first season, we kind of see, like, just, you know, the stresses of the relationship. She doesn't really like the whole long distance thing. She doesn't like that he has a duty to Starfleet above his duty to her. And it's interesting to see the mechanisms behind a romantic relationship in a species that eschews emotion. But I quite like the actress that they've got for T'Pring in Strange New Worlds. There's actually an episode where they they're working on their relationship and they try to do kind of a mind meld type thing where they're like doing a sharing of souls, but they end up accidentally doing a Freaky Friday. And so the actress who plays T'Pring ends up actually playing Spock for that episode, and I think she does a pretty good job of it. And that's a very silly episode. It's called Spock Amok, which, you know, is a reference to Amok Time, the first episode with T'Pring, but it's a comedy episode, and you get those. Some of the best episodes of Star Trek have just been silly ones. Like, everyone remembers The Trouble with Tribbles. That was a silly episode. I love those. As for Spock, he's played by Ethan Peck. He's the third major actor to play Spock after Leonard Nimoy and Zach Quinto. And he's playing a younger Spock. He's got, I think, a pretty interesting approach to it. I didn't quite like Spock in season 2 of Discovery as much, because he was kind of like, he was dealing with the mental health crisis in that one, which is, you know, that's fine. You can write that for Vulcans, absolutely. It didn't feel enough like the Spock that we knew. He feels a lot more like the original series Spock. And Ethan Peck, his actor, is actually the grandson of Gregory Peck, who played Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, which also... Sorry, I'm just going on a tangent here, but that starred Brock Peters as... I don't even remember the name of the character in To Kill a Mockingbird, but he's the black guy who is being accused of rape. And, Brock Peters ends up playing a couple different characters in Star Trek. He was in Star Trek 6. He played an admiral who was conspiring with the Klingons to keep the war going. And then on Deep Space Nine, he played Sisko's dad. So, you know, there we go. There's your 7 degrees of Sisko's dad, or whatever. Yeah, no, I like Ethan Peck as Spock. I like how they've got Spock. He's not the first officer yet, and he hasn't met Kirk yet, although he and Kirk meet in the alternate future. And the guy that they've cast for Kirk, Paul Wesley, I don't know how I feel about him yet. I know he's coming back as a recurring character in season 2, and they're gonna try and, you know, start up the whole, you know, friendship with him and Spock. But just from what I've seen in the season 1 finale, hasn't sold me on him. I don't think he's got the charm that William Shatner brought to the character, and also some of the writing. Like, I was kind of expecting him to talk more like Spock from the original series. I mean, not Spock, sorry, Kirk from the original series. And he doesn't do that. He kind of talks more in like a modern writer's writing him. And, like, I understand it's a modern show, but it's just another little thing that's like, there's like one line where he kind of talks in Kirk's cadence a bit, but other than that, it feels like it's a completely different character who is also named James Kirk. Hey, tipster. Yeah, I'm a nerd. You have come to the nerd show where we were talking about Star Treks. Let's see, what else do we have to talk about with season 1 of Strange New Worlds? Oh, okay. The main villains of Strange New Worlds season 1 are the Gorn. Let me pull them up. You'll immediately recognize them from pop culture. Come on. I hope the first picture. Here we are. Yeah, this guy. The guy that Kirk fought in the desert and built a rudimentary cannon and everything, and he's just, reptile in a rubber suit. Well, here they're CGI. They can make aliens look a little better these days. But the Gorn are like this show's Klingons. They are the main villains set up. And there's they show up in 2 episodes. The first episode is just a space battle. You never see an individual Gorn there. It's just all like, ship to ship combat. But that's a really fun episode where they have to hide out in a nebula and do like tactical retreats and advances and stuff. It's a very classic ship battle episode. But the second episode that they show up in is basically like aliens. Like they go to a crashed starship, and like the only survivor is a little girl like Newt from Aliens, and the Gorn reproduce by like spraying you with an acid that causes you to grow Gorn eggs inside of you. So like it's literally like the xenomorphs from the Aliens franchise. And the way that they're presenting it, especially one of the characters, La Noonien Singh, or La Noonien Sung, or Singh, I don't Singh, yeah. She's the chief security officer for the Enterprise, and she has like a backstory where her family was killed by the Gorn. She was captured, and so she has a lot of trauma associated with the Gorn. And the way she talks about the Gorn, she's like, oh, the Gorn, they're just all pure evil, and they're just monsters, and you can't reason with them and all that. The way she says it, it's presented as though it's just fact. Like, she's just right. Like, the Gorn aren't an allegory for anything. They're just a species of always chaotic evil kind of things. And I don't like that. I don't like it when people write a species to just be evil for the sake of being evil, especially the Gorn, because the first episode with the Gorn in the original series is Kirk thinking they're just monsters that they have to fight, but they're not. They're an intelligent species, and he he and the Gorn are fighting each other, and then they've actually been transported to that planet by some godlike beings who are like, you will settle this score here, one of you will kill the other, and that's who gets control of this sector. And Kirk is just like, at the end, he's like, look, I know the Gorn attacked us, but maybe we were moving too close to their territory. Maybe they thought we were posing a threat to them. Maybe they thought we were the aggressors. So no, I'm not going to kill him. He's an intelligent being, and I think we can work this out another way. And so that's that's the big takeaway from that episode is, just because he looks like a monster doesn't and is your enemy doesn't mean he's pure evil or anything like that. But the way that they're portrayed as monsters who just use people as breeding sacks to hatch out of, and then as soon as they're hatched, they're already giant ravenous murderers. I don't like the way that's portrayed, and I have to believe that they're playing the long game with this one, that they went into it with the idea of, yeah, we're gonna set them up where you just think they're monsters, and then you'll see the softer side of them later on. But as they stand right now in the show, I have a problem with how they're portrayed. I'm looking forward to seeing more of them. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do. But there's just some way around about how they write it that, I don't know, it doesn't sit right with me. What do we got for the first season still? Oh, yeah, okay. Final thought on the first season before I go on to the season 2 premiere. Erica Ortegas. She's the pilot. She has an awesome haircut. Look at that side shave. She feels like a cooler version of Tom Paris. He was the pilot on Star Trek Voyager. And out of the entire cast of Strange New Worlds, she's the only one who doesn't get a focal episode in the first season. She's played great. Melissa Navia is the actor who plays her. She's very charming. She's very, wisecracky and always quips on the bridge. She's charming, and she just didn't have a lot to do in that first season. The most that she did was an episode where the entire ship is taken over by like an energy being that turns everyone into characters from a children's book. And so she's going around as this swashbuckling sir or a knight who's like, fighting people with swords and stuff. And she gets a lot to do, but she's playing another character. She's not playing Ortegas while she's doing that. So the most that she gets is not playing herself. And so I really hope for season 2 they give her 1 or 2 focal episodes. There's I'm sure they will. Drake is the snake. Yeah, no, that was a great episode. It's a lot of fun. There's just pretty much every episode is either like one of those things that's like, oh my god, this is going to be one of the greatest like philosophical episodes of Star Trek ever, or oh my god, this is so much fun. I had so many laughs. Really, really entertaining. She's an entertaining character. They need to do more with her. And I think there was a podcast that I listened to called Open Pike Night that's about Strange New Worlds, and they do like a thing where they let people record like 90-second blurbs to have in the podcast, and they interview like cast and crew of the show. But I remember one of the running things that everyone was saying when they called in was, we need more Tegas. Hashtag more Tegas. So yeah, I am one of those. Hashtag more Tegas. And with that, I think we are ready to move on to... Let me update this. We are now in season 2. We are now in season 2 of Strange New Worlds. It premiered today. I watched it like, 10 hours ago or so. And I've had time to think about it. And it's just kind of a fun episode. Captain Pike has like left Spock in command of the Enterprise because number 1, the first officer, she's been arrested for being an Illyrian, which is they're a species that genetically modifies themselves, and that's illegal to do in the Federation. And she lied about being an Illyrian when she joined Starfleet, and so she's in prison right now awaiting a court-martial. And so Pike goes off to like, I think, find an advocate for her. So he's like, I'm gonna be gone for like 3 days, Spock, you're in command, but the ship's in space dock, so you're totally fine. Nothing's gonna happen. But as soon as Pike leaves, they get a message from Laan Noonien Singh, who's their chief of security, but she took a leave of absence in the first season to help that little girl from the ship that the Gorn attacked, help her find her family. And she does that, but it's on a planet that it's a dilithium mining colony that by treaty is shared by the Klingons and the Federation. Like every 30 days, the Klingons move out and the Federation takes over, and then, they swap back and forth. And because right now the Klingons are in rotation, if the Federation shows up there, it could be considered a violation of the treaty and a declaration of war. And, but Laan has warned them that they need to come because she has found out that the mining company that operates there, which is made up of both Klingons and Federation people, well, they were able to make a lot more money selling dilithium during the war. And so they are trying to spark they're trying to reignite the war by doing a false flag operation. Like they have been building up like an old Starfleet vessel and like to try to launch it to trick the the Klingons into thinking that the Federation is here. And so the Enterprise has to go off and like deal with that. And one of my favorite things about this episode, I don't want to go too much into all of the details. It just came out, you know. I don't want to spoil too much about it, other than to talk about the Klingons, because the Klingons. I'm actually just gonna Google this right now. Discovery Klingons. In Star Trek Discovery, they changed how the Klingons look. Here's a good example, because here you see Worf, Klingon from the Next Generation, looks like a human, but with like a little turtle shell on his head. And then here you've got the redesign in Star Trek Discovery. And let's get some other pictures of that so you can see. And pretty much everyone hated this redesign. And so for Strange New Worlds, even though Strange New Worlds is a spin-off of Star Trek Discovery, so the Klingons should, in theory, look the same. They look like this. They're just back to being... Here, let me... They're just back to being Klingons. They just look like they did in The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, although this show is shot in 4K, so it's, you know, a better makeup job. Like, you can really see... Let me zoom in on here. There's just a lot better detail in the headpiece. Like, look at all those little skin folds and everything like that. It looks really good up close. The makeup artists did a phenomenal job there. So I'm glad that the Klingons are back to being the Klingons. So happy. It's great. Let's all just pretend that the season 1 or the season 1 Star Trek Discovery Klingons just didn't happen. And like I think there's a real well, and here, okay, so look at this picture. This is actually a good example of what I want to talk about, because they actually did even like a slight redesign of the Klingons in season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. Notice she's got hair here now. None of the Klingons had hair in season 1 of Star Trek Discovery, and that's not a minor choice to make, because like Klingon hair, it's not just like an aesthetic thing. It's like, oh, we decided they're aliens, they shouldn't have hair. It's a symbol of Klingon virility and strength. Like, it's baked into their lore. The batleth, that giant like double-ended blade that they use as a weapon, the first batleth in Klingon myth was forged when Kahless the Immortal dipped a lock of his hair in a volcano. So to go from that to, oh yeah, no, Klingons don't have hair, it's like, you're messing with some pretty established lore. You're messing with some like kind of vital character of the species. And so in season 2, they made a thing, they had like a line where it's like, oh, now that the war is over, the Klingon High Council has decreed that we can grow our hair again. Which is like, okay, we get it. You're doing a retcon, but you throw in a line to explain it. But now they're not even bothering. They're like, no. Klingons, they just look like this now. They look like they should have from the beginning. Of course, I say from the beginning, even though in the original series, US Klingon, the original series, they looked like this dude. Just kind of cast white guys and paint them in brown face. I do think that giving them the bumpy foreheads is a better choice than this. So I'm happy with that. It's a great classic design, still looks good, and that's something that they like had already kind of dealt with, because in Picard season 3 they brought Worf back, and obviously they didn't change Worf to look like the Discovery Klingons. He just looked like he did in their Next Generation, except with a higher quality forehead piece, because he's not being shot for standard definition TV in the 80s. He's being shot for 4K TV now. I can't sing enough praises about the makeup job that Star Trek does. Like, all of their aliens nowadays look so good. like even like the Klingon redesign, like I don't like it for the Klingons, but it's not a bad design for an alien species. Like if they had these be the villains in Discovery and they weren't the Klingons, they were another alien race, it's a fine design. But this is Klingons. And, like, you know, they're the biggest, they're the most known alien race from Star Trek. Everyone knows what a Klingon is. So don't mess too much with the formula. This is a Klingon. Yeah, so another thing to go back on with let me pull up. Here we are. Una Chin Riley, she is the first officer. I didn't talk too much about her in my season 1 thing, but her main character arc is that she's an Illyrian. They're a species that all genetically modify themselves, but because of the Federation's history with genetic modification leading to the eugenics wars on Earth, in which like 600 million people died, Federation just has a blanket ban on genetic modifications. But for the Illyrians, they don't genetically modify themselves to become like a superior being. They do it to adapt to their environments. They do it to seek harmony with wherever they go. Instead of changing the world to adapt to them, they change themselves to adapt to wherever it is that they're living. And so I'm curious to see where Star Trek goes with this, because the ban on genetic modification is still a ban in effect in the 24th century, which is when TNG and Deep Space Nine take place. And so however they go with this, where they find out that she's genetically modified and now she's awaiting trial, they can't come up with a solution where the Federation is like, we were wrong and it's now allowed, because it's already established in canon that that doesn't happen. It's still banned. I suspect, I think probably next episode we're gonna get like a big trial episode with her, and I suspect that what they're gonna do is they're gonna like do an exception carve out for her. And I've heard like people talking about the trial episode, that everyone who has seen it, who's been given advanced copies, has said that it's kind of like one of the best episodes they've ever seen of Star Trek. So you know, I have a lot of confidence in the showrunners. I hope it's a good episode. I'm just thinking in terms of the resolutions that they are able to get for her character without breaking canon. And I'm not like opposed to breaking canon in certain ways, like the way that Nurse Chapel is a completely different character in this show from the timid little doting after Spock character from the original series. Changing her up, that's fine. She barely had a character. But big things that kind of like change the course of history for established canon, without doing like a reboot like Star Trek 2009 did, where they're like, oh, it's a total new reality, anything can happen, but the original timeline is still intact. Without doing, you know, something like that, there's only so much that you can do to change established lore in Star Trek. So I think that's a writing challenge that they're going to have to deal with in getting her back in working on the Enterprise, not, you know, imprisoned for the rest of the show's run, because I don't think that's going to be her character's fate. They're not going to do that. In fact, like a focal episode of hers in the first season is one where she reveals to Pike that she's an Illyrian, and tries to resign, and he's like, I'm not letting you resign, you're the best first officer in the fleet. If the day comes where Starfleet finds out about it, we'll fight them together. You know, you're a credit to your race. And like, she points out, she has like a personal log at the end of the episode where she's like, yeah, Pike's standing up for me because I'm a great Illyrian. I'm I'm a good officer. But what if I wasn't? What if I was just a person? Well, like, when's it going to be enough to simply be an Illyrian? And, you know, the idea that you don't have to be a model minority. why can't people just treat you the same way they would treat everyone else? Why do you have to, like, why do black people have to behave absolutely perfectly when dealing with cops when white people can pretty much get away with a whole bunch more stuff? It's kind of in that vein. And I thought that was a really strong message, and I'm curious to see where they go with it, because they are kind of limited by canon here. But I think, anyway, that probably about wraps up my thoughts on the premiere of Season 2 of Strange New Worlds, where I think it's going. We have quite a lot of stuff coming up the next week, so every week I'm going to be talking new Star Trek episodes, but we've also got there's a new MCU show coming out next week called Secret Invasion, starring Nick Fury. So next week I'll be talking the first episode of that, as well as the second episode of Strange New World Season 2. And if you have any recommendations for shows that you'd like me to talk about, or just like movies and stuff, I still need to see Across the Spider-Verse. Or is it Beyond the Spider-Verse? I don't know what the name of Spider-Verse 2 is, but I haven't seen it yet. I've heard everyone say it's amazing. I need to see it. If I see it before next stream, I'll talk about that too. But if there's anything that you want me to talk about, let me know. Join my Discord, or hit me up on Twitter. What are you interested in? Anyway, thank you all so much for tuning in. This has been a great first stream. Thanks to everybody for sticking around. Have a wonderful day. Bye.